Okay, why don't we start? We appreciate you all being on time. My name is Jen McCann, and I'm with the University of Rhode Island. And this meeting is a base SAMP meeting focused on the aquaculture element. You all have been invited to this invite-only meeting because you are the official representatives on the working group, our aquaculture element working group. So thank you all for attending and being a part of it. Again, the purpose of this meeting here, we are recording this meeting. And the purpose of this meeting is to learn about CRMC's aquaculture and permitting process. And then also to, in that process, to discuss first the current role of the municipality in this process, and also then to have a discussion about different mechanisms for improving this process. We know over the past, in other working group meetings, we've had suggestions and discussions about that, and the CRMC team has thought a lot and hard about this, so we have some thoughts on that as well, but your input is greatly appreciated. So with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Jeff Willis.
Thank you, Jen. And thank you all for making the time. I know how busy we are, and especially at the hour of the day. So thank you all for doing that. As Jen said, trying to get you all together to have a good discussion on process, particular as it focuses on the CRMC's aquaculture permitting process. It's not an issue that's new to us, but it does have opportunities for improvement. And I think it's clearly one of the reasons why we're here today in particular. But the other reason is that aquaculture has generally moved from smaller operations in the well-protected coastal ponds, has grown immensely there, and has moved to other pastures, if you will, that last pasture being Narragansett Bay, an area that hasn't seen aquaculture to the scale that we're seeing it now in a while. So it may be new to the communities in the bay as opposed to the communities in the salt ponds. So we first dealt with the issue in the mid-'80s in Point Judith Pond, and working on how to best permit, get the public involved, get the municipalities involved in what aquaculture is and what it could mean to the state and the towns. And then that moved into the smaller coastal ponds along the South Shore, Ninigret and Quaney in particular. And that came about 10 years after, in the 90s. So we worked on processes there to account for the growth of aquaculture on the surface waters of those ponds relative to the activities that occurred there. We put together two what we called aquaculture working groups for those two efforts. And this could be looked at as basically the third aquaculture working group, where we've taken the Narragansett Bay Special Area Management Plan planning process and focused it on, in this particular case, aquaculture, and how we look at aquaculture as it would be cited in Narragansett Bay. How do we make the process better, more inclusive, and find ways to better involve everyone so that the multitude of issues that do occur in Narragansett Bay will obviously still exist, while hopefully maybe introducing a new one in some of these areas. So before I pass it on to the particulars of the process with Ben and others, I do want to say that our processes for aquaculture permitting have always tried to be as inclusive as possible. We have learned over the years to set up, well ahead of any formal application process for aquaculture, a pre-application process. And that is a required step in the process. If someone new wants to site an aquaculture farm anywhere in the tidal waters of the state, they can't just submit an application and say, I want to put it there and go through the regulatory process. They have to meet with staff, and we have Ben Getz is our aquaculture coordinator, who will sit down with that applicant and walk them through what the requirements are. Where do you want to put the farm? What product do you want to grow? How do you want to grow it? Have you thought about the myriad of issues associated with doing that activity in that location? And that PD process is not just with our staff, but it's with stakeholders in that area. It's with specific stakeholders in the town that farm is being proposed. It looks to include not only the applicant with the municipality, but with other state agencies, and if applicable, the federal government, since they have a role in permitting as well. And it also asks to get interested parties involved. And how we do that is working through the community and asking to host meetings in that community, in that pre-application setting, to help us notify the interested community on that particular activity. That's what we've learned over the years. We'd want to improve on that process, which is why we're asking you all to come now and talk to us about what you see that process as being, how you see it can be improved. And that's really how I wanted to introduce the meeting, because there are much better ideas out there that we probably just aren't aware of. So we want to learn about them. We want to find ways to make the process even better than it is now. So I'll leave it there. I won't go into too much details, but just know that the aquaculture planning process usually results, by the time a formal application is submitted, usually results in a much different process than the aquaculturist had initially thought. And it's because of the input that you all in the communities that you all represent have in that process ahead of time. So with that, I'll pass it off to Ben to talk about particulars.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben Getch. I'm the aquaculture coordinator at CRMC. I'm going to put a link in the chat, but I'm also going to share my screen with the same image. Just putting the link there for your own future reference if you want. But this is the, okay. So this is our aquaculture permit review process. Some of you may have seen this before, maybe in an earlier form, but basically, as Director Willis mentioned, the preliminary determination is the initial phase. So this is kind of a flow chart, kind of a map of how you get from a proposal to a final review. And as you can see, it starts with the preliminary determination. The preliminary determination largely in itself is an application. So it's basically a draft of the application. The same requirements that a full application would have. We accept that application, after administrative review, and notify the town. Say, hey, town, we have received this application and we would like to schedule a preliminary determination meeting. The meeting is the main event of the preliminary determination, or the PD, as we say in shorthand. Every town is a little different in how it might treat a PD meeting. It is in essence a CRMC administrative, staff level meeting, but the forum is provided by the town, and that forum could be the Harbor Commission, for instance. A lot of towns choose to have a PD meeting in front of their Harbor Commission, or maybe after a Harbor Commission meeting. It can also be with various other town officials. It's all really, again, up to the town how they want to proceed at this level. But it is important that the town is involved. We provide notice to the town, as I said, and the town, if it's on a town body like the Harbor Commission, would be presumably put on that agenda and further publicized in that manner. Right now, as you probably all know, we have an aquaculture listserv. We've been publishing meeting notices of the SAMP group. Through that, we've also been publishing PD meetings, as well as public notices and other events. So the result of the PD meeting, we try to get as diverse a stakeholder group as possible at this level. This is the applicant's chance to present their proposal to the community and to receive feedback. The feedback is important at this time because they haven't submitted a full application. So there is the opportunity to amend, to change, modify the application in various ways to address concerns that may arise during a meeting like this. Very often at a preliminary determination meeting, we'll have members of the town, but we'll also have sometimes U.S. Coast Guard. Very often they will I solicit comment from them, and I usually receive that via email. But Department of Environmental Management, Division of Marine Fisheries, or Fish and Wildlife are often present at least one of those members is present at these meetings. Army Corps of Engineers also required to review these applications, and we'd like to get their input early on as well. And then it can be various other interest groups, such as fishing associations, whether they be commercial or recreational, are probably the most common. But also Save the Bay, other groups like that can take a particular interest in an application. So the result of the meeting is a report, which is written by me, and that report includes recommendations to the applicant from CRMC on basically how to proceed. Usually what I try to do is give a summary of the meeting, the points raised, concerns or comments that were given. I do these all for the benefit of the applicant and also for the record. CRMC may have various recommendations based on those issues raised. And those are all designed to give the applicant the information he needs to proceed with his successful application. Now, sometimes the result of the PD meeting is to maybe not proceed. Maybe CRMC recommends that this application not move forward. That could be for a variety of reasons. One of the things we're developing here with the SAMP process is that constraints map. So any number of those constraints that you see on our constraints maps would be reason not to pursue a full application, such as if it was in a current eelgrass habitat or in a navigational channel, anything like that. If certainly water quality all plays into this as well. So after that that period, the town's input is listed early on, but after we receive a full application based on the report, it goes out to 30-day public notice. I should just mention quickly that the recommendations from CRMC aren't compulsory. They're at the applicant. It's the applicant's prerogative to incorporate them into the full application. But it does put the applicant on notice. These are issues that if you don't address, will come up later in the review process potentially. So anyways, full application is received by CRMC. We do an administrative review for completeness, and we put it out to a 30-day public notice. And then, we solicit comment from the public at large. That includes the town. Any members who were part of the PD, who had attended the PD meeting, if we would expect maybe to hear a comment from them. But also, we are required to get the recommendation of the Director of Environmental Management, as well as, our Army Corps approval. That often comes later than the 30 days, but they are noticed as well at this time. And of course, Historical Conservation and Preservation Commission. And most importantly, the Marine Fisheries Council, or more specifically, their subcommittee, the Shellfish Advisory Panel. We are legislatively mandated to consider their opinion and recommendation on any aquaculture application. And that is for their determination of the consistency of the application with the pursuit of the marine fisheries in the state. Again, those recommendations from DEM and the Marine Fisheries Council are merely recommendations, but they are considered by the council at a decision. So after we have all these reviews completed, we will review the file again once more for completeness and determine whether the application is eligible for administrative approval or is required to have a public hearing. Almost all applications are required to have a public hearing, though it is possible if no objections are received during the 30-day public notice, and likewise no issues or objections are raised from DEM or the Marine Fisheries Council, an application, if it's under a certain size, is eligible for administrative approval. And that is, I believe, 10 acres with no gear associated and 3 acres with gear. So we would then have a public hearing, which would be advertised as any of our semi-monthly public hearings would be. And at that meeting, there would be opportunity for public testimony, as well as the testimony of the applicant. And the result of the meeting is really one of three things. It can be approved as proposed. It can be approved with a modification or some further stipulation to address a particular issue, or it could be denied. Now, I would say, you know, what CRMC has implemented recently with the listserv is to notify applications at the very beginning with the PD process, to publish the 30-day public notice again. And we would also, you know, publish, you know, a hearing date for a particular application.
If you don't mind, does anyone have any questions about this framework or this process that they'd like to ask Ben just before we move forward? Ben, there is one question. Does this comply with all state and federal rules and regulations, or is this something that CRMC just made up? Where does this come from?
Well, it doesn't change our standard notification process, which we still continue to do as we did before, which is compliant with state and federal laws. This is above and beyond that. And we did so in an effort to streamline and the notifications of these events to the wider public in a way that would be easy for them to sign up for, essentially.
I guess the question is directed at like this slide that you're presenting, this process that you're that you use or apply with for aquaculture.
This process is outlined in our regulations in the Red Book.
Okay, and so it complies with all federal and state regulations. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, to my knowledge, it does. Yes.
Okay, and then as you're saying, like things like this aquaculture listserv is an example of how CRMC is responding to making this process better, even though the process is compliant with all federal and state regulations.
Yes, yeah, it was for a variety of reasons. One, it streamlines management of multiple notification lists that we were maintaining before. That might have been town specific or even application specific. This gives people the ability to be ensured that they sign up for this list and they'll get all notifications. All these notifications, at least the 30-day public notice requirements, those are published as they normally would be on our website, along with all other 30-day public notices. So this is a way to kind of just have just aquaculture in one spot for notification.
Okay, and Chris Cotta has had a couple of points. Chris, do you want to unmute yourself and talk a little bit about some of your comments?
Sure. When this came up a while back, in August, I sent a letter to both you and Ben outlining some of Tiverton's concerns about aquaculture, and I gave you, I think, 10 fairly decent bullet points. And while that letter went out on August 3rd, I do have a couple of other concerns that have arisen since then that we will need assistance with on how to deal with, especially riparian moorings. But specifically, you know, our biggest concern in town is we're not against aquaculture per se. It's the fact that most of our community along the river is a very rural area with very little to no commercial business activity other than the basin and right near Nantucket Pond. And I know that we've had hearings locally and through CRMC about putting aquaculture in Nantucket Pond, and due to the extensive competing interest there, I think it's probably best that be put off for a while, at least to be revisited for aquaculture in the future. But as to licensing, you know, we get a lot of complaints in town that we've never been given notice from constituents about these. And even though they're on our Harbor Commission meeting, and our Harbor Commission has done a fabulous job of trying to hold public hearings for every issue that's come before them to get public input, it's 6 months to 8 months later, we're still hearing complaints. We never knew about this. Because it's not well advertised. And there are a lot of affluent people who live along the waterfront, and not that it gives them any preference at all. But the concerns are very valid when it comes to utilizing residential property to run commercial businesses. So, and I've, when it was Dave Butel and Ben Goetz, when we had some activity for licensing along the shoreline, we addressed those concerns, and we thought that we'd had that pretty much nipped in the bud, except one of the applicants now has acquired property and has intimated locally that he may use that property to maybe do some activities related to aquaculture until such time that the town has to go through the process of going through zoning violations, which is not something I don't think we really want to embrace. There just shouldn't be an opportunity for people to utilize this along their neighbors' properties to run commercial businesses off of their property into the water. Now, granted, CRMC has full authority to do what they want to do with the water, and we understand that. But, in a very rural community, we have some issues with, the boundaries. We expected that anything along the riverfront that was going to be permitted would have to be done by commercial boat, and that people would have to take their businesses would have to take their products to and from commercial docks or ramps, that they would not be utilizing residential property to run commercial operations. So that's the largest concern that we have. But as far as notices go, there are, like, one of the applicants that came in, very well thought out, good process, but the applicant put it in the middle of a mooring field of 60 boats. I mean, things need to be thought out before they're actually entertained. And simply because he didn't know that there were moorings there during the winter time when he, and I don't know where that particular application stands at the moment, but there are those kind of concerns. Then if anybody has a dock or they have riparian moorings, there needs to be notice for them for access to and from those, because there may be obstructions in the water that mitigate them being able to get access to their riparian moorings or their docks if they're authorized. So that's why we think that there should be at least some notification to the ownership around the area. And we think some of these notifications should be done timely, within 30 days. That all licensed activity needs to be out in the boundaried areas. And then I think it was pretty thorough on most of what we're looking for, but the biggest issue is the strict issue of complying to our zoning issues. Like I said, at the end of the day, we don't really have any issue with CRMC permitting them. But an issue that came to light since the letter that I sent has actually been, we have a number of people who have seen applicants for various areas along the waterfront and have decided that they're entitled to 4 riparian moorings and have gone out and put markers in there demanding to get their moorings, even though they don't even own boats. I'm not opposed to giving them riparian moorings, and we do this on behalf of CRMC is the way I look at it, because we're facilitating the desire of CRMC in our harbor management plan as to where these moorings should or shouldn't be. And we permit riparian moorings based on the criteria from CRMC. And I've tried to get some of these applicants to say, look, we'll give you a riparian mooring. It may not be where you want it to be. And quite frankly, even if we did approve it where they want it, and CRMC in their ultimate wisdom decides that that's where the aquaculture field is going to be, we're going to tell you to move it. But it's just creating they think if they're there first, that this is, the aquaculture isn't going to come in there. And it doesn't work that way. I understand that, but trying to explain that to some constituents makes it difficult. So it's a public perception, PR issue on how we communicate these things to the various people involved, and whether they're property right owners, the riparian rights owners, or dock owners. So that's why my letter was kind of detailed in some of the things I see that might help facilitate an easier way of letting the people know of what's going on around them, and more informative of the permitting process that CRMC actually does.
Thank you, Chris. Jeff or Ben, do you want to respond to that? Or I know Deb also has her hand up from Tiverton. I don't know if it's relevant to what we're talking about.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
no. Very briefly, Chris, I fully agree with a lot. I have your letter open up as we were speaking, actually, and a lot of those things are what CRMC does, but I think you nailed it in your closing remarks. Public relations and public perception go a long way to having folks understand what is trying to be done out in those public waters. Our whole purpose of being is to balance uses. That's what coastal zone management does, is balance uses. So we are trying to figure out how to balance, I won't say a relatively new activity that is aquaculture with everything else, but in this area of Narragansett Bay, it is a new activity. So that PR and public perception do go a long way, and your points are very well taken. In large part already being done, and some parts need to be done better. So I appreciate that input very much, and that's why hopefully at the end of the day, whenever this day ends, which could be several months from now, we'll have figured that out to the best of all of our collective abilities.
Okay.
Ben, are you good?
Well, just as far as land use goes, you may or may not be aware, but aquaculture is considered agriculture under state law. And to the degree that a rural community has commercial agriculture happening in, on its properly zoned land, the husbandry activities involved, around aquaculture, shellfish aquaculture, are likewise viewed as agricultural uses and are permissible. But that's,
So I'm not going to disagree with you on that point, except when somebody buys a property that is 40 feet wide by 100 feet wide, it doesn't comport to a farm. It doesn't comport to agriculture. It doesn't comport to zoning for that purpose. In Tiverton, you have to have 5 acres or more to farm. You can farm for less than that if you seek zoning variances, but you don't have an inherent right on certain parcels of land. So it's something the town will wrestle with, but it's not something that we were expecting to have happen. We would expect to see anything on the waterfront in a rural district where people would have to come and get their products and service them by commercial boat to and from dockage.
Yeah, in CRMC regulation, you cannot land commercial product on a residential dock.
So the neighbors are concerned that they're going to be dragging the cages up off the beach, put them on their land, power washing them and bringing them back out. I'm not sure how aquaculture works as it relates to oysters. I'm not an oyster farmer. I'm just telling you what the concerns are that we're getting from our constituents, that, this should not be permitted. So it is what it is at the end of the day. If it was a large farming, piece of land that, comported with that, we may have to make an amenity to it, but I don't see it on this particular piece of property. He may be entitled to riparian mooring, but I'm not so sure he can farm.
Well, regardless, it is, I think you're right.
No, I get what you're saying. If he comported to the proper zoning for the town's rules, it wouldn't have an issue with it, and we would kind of be stuck with it.
Yeah. No, I mean, CRMC, to the degree that we look at the operational plan of a farm, we are really looking, we are approving the actual 4 corners of the location where that farm will be. The support activities outside of it may or may not conflict with a CRMC regulation or policy, but it goes to show just how much an applicant has to really research and look into to make sure that their business plan conforms to all laws, both local, state, and
No, I agree, and that's kind of what we're looking for, is that they need to know all of it, not just, I have a license and I can do what I want. But that's kind of what we're going to be fighting with in the next near future. But it's something we'll deal with. I mean, it's we're not trying to be so negative that aquaculture doesn't happen. We understand that that's going to happen. It just needs to happen cohesively among the varying interests that are there. So
I think if I can just add, I think just one important distinction here is that while the CRMC may be authorizing an activity in tidal waters vis-a-vis the aquaculture lease and the operation, if the applicant that you're speaking about, Chris, were to propose some type of structure on that property, that too would require a CRMC permit, and whatever that activity other than a dock, the structure on that property would have to comport with local zoning. CRMC regulations do not usurp local zoning. That's for the community to decide and enforce.
Okay.
Okay, we have Deb and then Jamie. So Deb?
Hi, thanks. I have two questions about the listserv. And I didn't get a chance to follow up. I did get your response to my email asking about whether or not viability sites were included in the listserv. And I got your response that they are not. My first question is why? Why exclude them from the listserv? And my second question involves the 30-day notification that goes out on the listserv. Does that 30-day notification give stakeholders the opportunity to get in front of some of the advisory boards and panels to have the opportunity to express concerns? Or I'm thinking in particular, for example, with the saltwater anglers, if it was a fishing hole and someone received 30-day notice, an angler did, would that 30-day notice give that particular stakeholder enough time to get in front of the panel to express concerns over conflict?
Sure, yeah, so commercial viability permits, they're not leases, are limited to 1,000 square feet, so smaller than your average home, and are limited in time to 3 years. They're administrative permits, generally speaking, but we do notify the town. And if we receive objection from the town, it is treated essentially like a normal Category B type application. It would require a hearing in front of our council. Now, there's no real reason why commercial viability permits are notified to the listserv, and the listserv is a pretty new thing. But a commercial viability permit, as I said, is good for 3 years, and it's broken into two 18-month periods. So you could get approval for your first 18 months. Your second 18 months, you have to apply again with an update report on your findings of how viable that site is. And it will go out to 30-day public notice. So it would be noticed at that time. And it would require a public hearing in front of the council as well. So, changing the commercial viability notification requirements, if we include that in the listserv, like the PD, it's possible. It is a much more limited, permit than what a full aquaculture application, in that it has a finite time period, it's non-renewable, and it's limited to a very small area. And as far as your second question, the Marine Fisheries Council, the only public body that's holding a meeting before, or I should say after the 30-day public notice, would be the Shellfish Advisory Panel, or the Marine Fisheries Council, which are essentially one of the same bodies. The Shellfish Advisory Panel is a subcommittee.
I guess I should have framed my question differently. I guess I should have asked, do any of the public advisory panels happen before that 30-day public notice?
They actually have to happen afterwards.
Okay.
Because we take any objections from the 30-day public notice, and those are presented as part of the application to the Shellfish Advisory Panel or Marine Fisheries Council. And just as a matter of practicality, it usually happens months after the 30-day public notice. I didn't get to finish my little presentation, but I was going to just note that to get from the preliminary termination down to a scheduled meeting before the council is often 9 months or more, probably closer to a year. sometimes longer. And that is just because, the way scheduling works, with the Marine Fisheries Council, the way the review occurs at the Army Corps of Engineers, all these things take time. The Army Corps of Engineers oftentimes will have to consult with NOAA and the National Marine Fisheries Service on any endangered species concerns that may arise, and that takes an additional time too. So there is a lot of time usually between the 30 days and like the Marine Fisheries Council. And the Marine Fisheries Council is a public body. They're made up of volunteers essentially who advise DEM on a number of things. Regulation changes, seasons for fishing. That is really their primary purpose. They've also been delegated the additional responsibility of advising CRMC on aquaculture. So they have a lot of meetings that occur throughout the year. A lot of those meetings don't involve aquaculture at all. And sometimes it's just a matter of finding space on their agenda as well.
Are expansions and transfers of leases also serviced by the listserv? Does notice go out for those as well?
So an expansion, which is an area that is not previously under lease, that's being applied for, actually goes back to the very top to a preliminary determination. So an expansion would be noticed at the preliminary determination, noticed again at the 30-day public notice. Transfers, according to our regulations, can be approved by our director administratively, with the caveat that the operation remains the same.
I was just about to say that, Ben.
Yeah, if the operation were to change in any way, we would treat it like a modification, which would be a required 30-day public notice.
So on a transfer, does the timing stay the same as well?
Yeah, so if I had a 10-year lease and I sold it in the 5th year of operation to you, Chris, you would only have 5 years on that lease.
All right.
Okay, Jamie's been very patient here. Jamie?
Thank you. Much of my questions that I was going to ask were answered while I waited with my hand up. But to expound on what Chris had said about the public notification. So when I first started here, I had a lot of complaints that many neighbors or many residents didn't get notification, or that the public hearing or the PDs were held, during the middle of the day when they were at work and they didn't have time for. Some of that has been taken care of in the way that it's handled now through, and we do it similar to Tiverton now. We handle it through the Harbor Commission. It gets advertised through that way, and that's great, except for the, I forget what you call it, listserv. So the listserv is great, except we know that we have almost 10% of our residents that don't use computers, and we know that from other ways. So other than that, a lot of that has been taken care of, so it's a little better. And now having it at the Harbor Commission, they meet at 5 o'clock at night. At the end of the Harbor Commission meeting, they start to do that. As Ben knows, we had our first one not long ago, and it was good. So, I'm just emphasizing what Chris said, and I agree with him that those types of complaints, when people don't hear about hearings, is bad. I don't know what you do about the 10% or so of people, and maybe Jamestown's unique. What do you do about those 10% that don't get computer service, or, they just, we have an older population here and they just don't pay attention to that. But I know they get aggravated when they don't hear about the PDs or the fact that there's an aquaculture farm coming or whatever. And I'll still go back on my old high horse of saying that we really need to know when enough is enough. When is our fields full of aquaculture farms? Thank you.
But Jamie, didn't you guys publish with that most recent PD meeting we had? Didn't you guys also put something in the paper?
Oh yeah, I should have added that. The Harbor Commission, give them the credit where it's due. Kim's on the line, but she'll remember to tell them all, and she was part of this, or she was responsible. That they and Lisa did a great job in getting the message out to as many people as we could. So they both worked hard on that. But yeah, we put it. The Harbor Commission, when they advertised their harbor meeting, they also put it in our local free paper, that the Jamestown Press, and they told everyone that it was coming. So yeah, thanks, Ben. I forgotten about that part. So that did help. But you know, the listserv was a great idea, but it's a great idea for the computer savvy people.
Jamie, thanks for that. And just to one of your last points about, you know, how much an area might be saturated, you know, is that enough for a particular area? That is precisely one of the issues we're trying to address through this aquaculture element of the Narragansett Bay SAMP. So the input from the communities is going to be extremely valuable and important as we move forward with this process, because we're looking to develop a map that essentially is an exclusion zone, if you will, so that applicants are directed to other areas in the bay where aquaculture could be looked upon more favorably. So, you know, we're in the beginning stages of this process and advancing through and getting input from a lot of stakeholders, and municipalities are a very important part of this process. So thanks for the reminder on that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Jim. So many of the residents that have voiced their opinion about this, you know, some of them aren't so dead against having an aquaculture farm, but they're always worried about how big that farm is going to become or how many more are going to come in that area. You know, some of them I think would agree, okay, it's fine that there's a 4-acre farm coming in front of me, but is that going to become 11 acres? Is there going to be another farm put right next to it? How many more? So if I say yes to this one as a resident, am I saying yes to, you know, the next 30 years of, you know, 300 acres? And if they knew a grand plan or a grand scheme, I think some of the resistance wouldn't be so bad. And as I said, you know, Lisa and Kim and everyone from town has tried to do everything they can to get the message out and to communicate with our residents. But some of it is really in the genuine concern, you know, okay, it's great today that we're having this, but what are we going to have tomorrow? You know, and the unknown really hurts them. And then, you know, so I don't know, it scares them.
Yeah, understood. Excellent point. And you know, I'll go back to you know, this aquaculture element and the process that we're all involved in now, and that the map that at some point at the end of this process that the CRMC hopes to adopt will essentially show the areas where aquaculture could potentially grow. So people will have a much better sense of, okay, well, it's very likely it's not going to be located here because it's an exclusion area. And so it's not going to be looked upon favorably. And other areas of the bay where you don't have the exclusion zones, those are potential areas. It's no guarantee that an aquaculture application could be approved in that location, however. It still has to go through the review process as it currently exists today.
Right. So recently we had a PD for a kelp, what do they call it, kelp farm?
Mhm.
where they grow, maybe I would call it seaweed, but anyway. So
right.
we had that recently, and after the PD, you know, the biggest fear of those people is that, okay, so if we say, now this is a whole new area, there's no other farms there, no oysters, no nothing, right? This is a whole new area. And I've heard from, you know, the residents in that area that are very skeptical of it. They're like, okay, so if we agree with this, I don't know if it was a 2,500 feet long farm. I think it was, Ben, you can correct me if I'm wrong. If we ever agree to this, oh my God, what's going to come next week or what's going to come next year? Once we open up that area, does that mean it's going to get, you know, is there a whole army of farms going to come in? So that's, you know, that's a lot of the concern. Lisa or Kim, please correct me if I've missed anything or wrong.
Can I just ask a question here? I know we wanted to talk about, and these are really good concerns, you know, about the role of, you know, the process and how the role of the municipality in this process. And Ben, I know you were talking about Jamestown, and Jamie did a great job as far as what Jamestown is doing. Ben, are there other municipalities in Rhode Island or other places that we think maybe we could use as examples or share as far as the role of municipalities in this process?
Well, the town of Charleston, I think, probably has more aquaculture than any other town, and that's, you know, largely because it has all of Ninigret Pond, which has a dozen or more farms, probably 70 some odd acres at this point. But it also has the eastern part of Quanakatog, which has a handful of farms as well. But we've had a really long history with the town of Charleston, really since the beginning of what I like to call the modern era of aquaculture, starting around the turn of the millennium. And so Charleston's harbor management plan, interestingly, addresses aquaculture to some degree, and it's mostly descriptive in nature. So it's mostly talking about kind of the process that I laid out at the beginning of the talk, and how the town has organized itself to participate in that process. And when it comes to notification, they make a recommendation that that concerned citizens should really just keep an eye on the Harbor Commission agendas. That is where you will be guaranteed to find the first notice of any new proposal, before it's a full application, because of the PD process that's in place. And I think that's a good recommendation for any town. Is to figure, every town is kind of their own expert on their community, right? And they every day have to deal with communicating with their residents and their constituents. And every town's going to figure out how best to reach those people that would be concerned about this, I guess. Whether that's by paper, having their own email listserv, or simply just directing people to say, hey, pay attention to the Harbor Commission agendas. That's where you're going to see these events first.
Thank you. Deb Hagan, you had a question. Why is the onus for notice on the towns, not the applicant?
Yeah, it seems like the applicant should be the one responsible for posting in local newspapers, knocking on the doors of Upland Neighbors. Am I on mute or am I not muted?
No, you're good. We hear you.
It doesn't seem like it should be the responsibility of the town. The town's not the one seeking something, the applicant is.
If I can jump in, and you're absolutely correct, Deb, but it's more of a partnership when we're trying to reach constituents and communities, and the town through their harbor process, conservation commission, whatever process it might want to use is best suited for that. And so that's why we just ask the towns if they can help us with that communication aspect. You're right about the formal notification. No problem having the applicant put advertisements in the newspaper if that's what it comes down to. But again, if we're trying to reach communities and constituents, stakeholders, we're just asking for some help with the towns.
But with direct notice notification, and I think this is something that Chris Cotta addressed in his August letter to you guys, making it a requirement that the applicants notify Upland Neighbors through certified mail. And you were talking earlier about public perception and how this is really a PR issue on some level, and I think that would go a long way to rectifying some of that if people felt like they were being treated fairly. I'm going to mute myself because my dog's about to bark because the kids are walking in the house. So
that's fine. Yeah, that is certainly a strategy that we want to explore. It's not the first time we've heard it. So it's why we're directing a lot of these outreach and what I call scoping meetings to specific groups, this one being the municipal group. We've had that comment come back to us with other scoping meetings that we've held. So it's definitely worth exploring. And like I said, at the end of the day, these are strategies that we want to have fleshed out and figure out on how best to do them. Jamie, Lisa, Kim, they can all tell you about one particular aquaculture farm over in Dutch Harbor where the aquaculturists did go door to door and did set up individual meetings with the residents to help that aquaculturist figure out how can he move the project forward and balance the needs of the neighborhood? And that was all the communication was on the aquaculturist there. So those, and that was a specific activity, it was a specific instance. I think we're talking more in generalities here, but it can, I'm sure we can find ways to deal with that communication at every level, every communication level along the way.
Okay, thanks. And before I go to Chris, there are other municipalities, Warwick, Barrington. Do you guys have Little Compton? Are there any questions that you have or recommendations, or how do you engage with CRMC on this? Dan, I see you unmuting yourself.
Hi, Jen. Thank you. I guess I have a question about your permitting and enforcement relative to the operations plan. And it goes more towards the local zoning and the landside operation. Is the permit tied with whatever that operation plan is? And it goes to what Chris touched on. It's the nuisance that's being created on the land side of the operation. Warwick has a lot of very densely developed waterfront. And I could see issues coming up if we had an operation where the aquaculturist was pulling up with his trucks at the end of a right of way and loading, unloading, and that sort of thing. Is the enforcement going to be put on the municipalities, or is coastal enforcement able to come in relative to the permit? More than just the 4 points in the water, it's also the landside operation and plan that is approved. Ben, is that is there some type of connection there?
Well, not particularly. I mean, when it comes to CRMC's enforcement, it really is with regards to the activities within the four corners of the lease. Of course, if those activities, in a way have expanded. So, for instance, if a farm has expanded beyond where it's supposed to be, well, then that's an issue. We're gonna correct that. If a right of way is being used in a way that's not in accordance with it, then that could be an issue too, certainly for CRMC. But when it comes to the land use, unless it has to do with something within the coastal zone or the use of a residential dock, which is not allowed for the landing of product, it's not necessarily tied to CRMC's enforcement responsibilities directly. However, there is kind of a little bit of a caveat there in that, what you can't, for instance, be running a shellfish dealership out of their property without the proper licenses. That's not from CRMC though. That would be from Department of Health and DEM. So that's maybe part of an answer to your question, but the short answer is that once it's what happens off the lease, it's generally not part of our, at least my role as aquaculture coordinator.
So if they're unloading catch on a residential dock, bringing in their traps, running the operation out of there, that's on the municipality?
No, if it's on a residential dock and they're landing product, that would be something that CRMC would address.
So that would also apply to a right of way ending at the water, paper street, that sort of thing.
That one I'm not so sure on. I might defer to Jeff on that. Okay.
Dan, that it's actually it's a great question because the regulations don't address it at all. The regulations are trying to limit the aquaculture operations to what happens in the water and not use that residential dock that we also have jurisdiction over for commercial uses. And that's a result of longtime commercial fishing activities, policies that we had, where you can tie up your commercial vessel to it, but that's about all you can do. So this particular issue, using a street end right of way, a boat ramp, if you will, and Chris, you did address this in your letter to us also, is an issue that is certainly on the table for discussion because the regulations are silent on it.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Again, it goes back to the landside operation and the municipalities having the resources to deal with it when it's not really what we do.
No, and fully agree with that. And likewise, the same answer on the state end. But here we are, if you want to take it one step further, a lot of rights of ways publicly designated have do not have a commercial aspect to it. Boat launching ramps are for, in large part, maybe they were built with state or federal monies for fishing access, and they don't have a commercial aspect associated with them either. So those types of things become an enforcement matter, and the enforcement agencies have to go and deal with it. And like you said, the resources just aren't there to directly deal with it. So is it something that our regulation should look at? Clearly, it's come up and we should put it on the table for discussion. So I appreciate that aspect too.
Great, thank you.
I was going to go to Chris, but Jim, you sort of wrote something in the chat. Is there something you'd like to say or?
Yes. Basically, I just put a note in the chat, speaking to the noticing issue that's been raised, and Jeff pointed to partnering with the towns. And so we've been thinking very hard about, different ways notification could happen if it were to be solely on the applicant's responsibility, as has been suggested. The problem, or one of the problems that arises, of course, is, did everyone who should have gotten notice receive a notice? And, how far along the shoreline do you go? Is it 500 feet? Is it 1,000 feet? Is it 1 mile? Who should be notified? And so there's the possibility, of course, that there could be a legal challenge to a notification process if someone, a property owner who believed that they should have received notice, didn't receive a notice. So that's the primary reason that Jeff indicated that the CRMC preference is to partner with the municipalities to find the best ways to ensure that anyone who wants to receive notice will receive notice. So we're still thinking about how best to do that. And again, that's one of the reasons we put the aquaculture listserv together, so that anyone who wanted to get notice of any CRMC application relating to aquaculture would indeed receive that notice. So we're still looking for ideas, and we're open to discuss those further, certainly.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, sorry, Chris, we took a little detour, but wanted to make sure other people had questions. So Chris, go for it.
So a couple of things on that last comment about notice, and to Deb's point. Land use matters when it comes to development issues. We put the onus on the developer to provide the applicant names of who they need to provide notice to. They come into the town hall, the assessor's office, they do what they need to do, whatever research they need to do, but it's not on the onus of the town. And I'm going to give you a prime example as to why this is a concern of mine. We have a condo development here that has probably 400 units in it. There's a abutter next to it that has another 300. By the time I'm done, I'm going to be upwards, if I do certified mails, it could be in the thousands of dollars. And I'll give you another example. When the Bowens had their agriculture permit put in, it was moved 3 times. Whose onus is it to put the responsibility to put the notice up? It surely isn't my responsibility as a town entity to do that, especially seeing how we get nothing out of it other than to be cooperative partners. Whether it's done by general mail, certified mail, somewhere along the line, the applicant needs to be able to figure out how to provide notice. It's not the onus on the town. That's just one caveat. The other reason why I put my hand up was, what I don't know is, and I'm a commercial fisherman. I've been fishing the Scarlet River for many years. I'm also a recreational boater, and we do have a lot of people who use the Scarlet River. And I'm not saying that they would be overly impacted, but if aquaculture is starting to become a thing and it gets bigger and bigger, are there going to be aids to navigation to identify where these particular plots are? Because a lot of people are not really familiar with, you can be in the channel, how far outside the channel you can be. And if we are going to start this and it takes off, I'd really hate to see the conflict without having some sorts of aid to navigation that would be appropriate for large scale kind of development for aquaculture. And I think that needs to be considered as well, especially for an area that's never had it, people, sailboats are used to going up and down this river without any obstruction. And a lot of powerboat is the same way, but it's, a lot of these people would not have any purview as to what aquaculture is happening, what the hearings are. They may own boats in Little Compton or over in Portsmouth, and all of a sudden they're traveling something they've traveled for years, but all of a sudden they're on top of something they shouldn't have been into. So I think it's very important that aid to navigation is also part of this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very important point, Chris, and Ben can speak to that. But just back to your first point on the notification, we are not in any way suggesting that the onus is strictly on the town. We're looking to partner with the towns. The CRMC is looking to partner with the towns to figure out the best way for notification.
But we'll clearly do public hearings with our Harbor Commission and any other way that we can do that. But the constituents are asking or demanding that they get formal notification. And we're trying to find a way to alleviate that. And we think the best onus is to put it on the applicant if that's going to be a requirement.
Ben, did you want to add to that?
Oh, yeah, regarding is navigation. So, the last aquaculture working group in 2009, as you may remember Jeff mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, was largely focused on the salt ponds. That's where the development was really happening. And one of the things that came out of that working group was actually, one of the things they were considering was a standardized marking system. But the group actually decided that the best thing to do with markings was to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis, because certain leases maybe should be marked well with specific buoys, but most of the leases in the ponds were in areas where it was best to minimize the visual impact, so they only used just standard kind of pop buoys on the corners. It might be a specific color to identify the farm, but they'll have the markings of the permit number. Now, this has kind of evolved a little bit as we've gone in, as the bay has been further developed, particularly with floating gear. In that the U.S. Coast Guard years ago recommended that sites with floating gear, sites in areas where it might be a hazard to navigation, should have something more adequate than just your 4 standard pop buoys. So what we often will stipulate on an approval is, solar powered lighted corner markers, maybe just on the offshore side of the farm to give, an aid to navigation for boaters. Also, radar reflectors can be installed, and those actually have a fairly small visual impact despite their name. It's just like a metal pole.
I know what they are.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's just for the benefit of anyone who didn't know. But those do have to be registered with the U.S. Coast Guard as a private aid to navigation, a PATON. Harbor commissions will probably be familiar with this requirement in their own markings that they have. And then it's a responsibility of the applicant to maintain that private aid to navigation. One of the elements we are looking at in this base AMP is enhanced navigational aids. So to your point, Chris, this is something we are considering. And whether it's a combination of lighted buoys or radar reflectors, or even as some towns have kind of expressed to me, just using the hazard can, basically like a no wake buoy that would say, caution, underwater hazards. That likewise could be registered as a PATON and is pretty universally understood by most boaters as a danger or caution symbol. So okay. I think any one of those types of devices would be appropriate in different circumstances. But yeah, no, I appreciate the question, and it's something we are looking at.
Okay.
Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, a couple things. First, I wanted to let Dan and Warwick know that we handle in Jamestown the landside impacts of it, say allowing catch and equipment to go over land. We handle that on a zone by zone basis. So we do actually regulate, what can come into the land by district. But I wanted to address, the whole notification. I know I spoke at the last meeting quite a bit about it, but I think that I just wanted to let CRMC, everybody, and I appreciate you listening so much, but I think you're hearing kind of the same thing over and over and over, because the state zoning and planning enabling acts require applicants to notify. And so that is why that's the model that we're all used to as planners in towns. And it's been working that way for over 30 years. And I realize you're in kind of a different business, but I think from our mindset, that's why we go to that model of the applicant being responsible for the notification, because it's tried and true, and it's worked for us over the years. So I just wanted to let you know that we're not just, it's just something that we're used to doing. And so for the town to be now responsible for that, and I guess there's a good reason for it, the applicant being responsible for it. Number one, if they get it wrong, it's not the town's responsibility. And so I don't remember who just said that. Maybe it was Jim, but it really should be on the applicant on them to make sure that who's notified is notified. And in the case of Little Compton or Tiverton having 400 condos, I mean, that's a bit daunting, I think, to any applicant, and certainly to the town having to notify that many people. But maybe there's a homeowners association. But I just wanted to say that I think it's just the model that we're used to, and the responsibility of who gets notified shouldn't be on the CRMC, and it shouldn't be on the town either. It should be on the applicant. Thank you.
Lisa, yes, no, fully agree. And maybe there's a little disconnect here. I would never ask the town to individually notify property owners within X amount of feet of an aquaculture farm. That would, if that's going to be a requirement, that would solely land on the shoulders of the aquaculture applicant. Absolutely never ask the town to do that. I think the partnership that we've been talking about is more, can you notify through your harbor committee that you're going to talk about Joe Smith's aquaculture application tonight? And here's some materials behind that. That's the type of notification that in partnership we've been talking about. But you're right. If it comes down to individual property owner notifications, CRMC is not going to do that, nor is the town. The applicant is going to do that.
Okay.
I would mention that, to Lisa's example with the zoning side of things, the notification, most of that notification can be, the parcel data is in the way it's presented online in the public, viewers for the Vision Government or whatever it is. You can do an abutting property search. So it's fairly easy to kind of generate a list of people who abut your property. The particular challenge an applicant would have in an aquaculture application is you wouldn't be able to run that analysis so easily. And even within the public viewing portals that are available for property parcel data, you don't have the ability to do the analysis of what something offshore within a certain radius. You can't plot coordinates in there and create polygons and run buffers and things like that. So I think it's just something to note that it is, while I understand the analogy, it's a little different when you get into the water.
Can I just jump in? We were able to do that on our GIS system. So when
on your GIS system, the
Yes.
ArcGIS, right, which is not available necessarily.
No, we don't have, well, I should say it's our town database, which is the Main Street maps, and which is how we do our radius. So somebody can go on and basically they've got a measuring tool. And so we were able to very easily, for the last aquaculture application, just go on and say, okay, here's the limits, the 1,000-foot limits, here's the water side aspect of it, and just basically draw a line to the land and then go 200 feet from there. And so that's kind of what we did. And it was a pretty easy process for us. And, because you're not talking about, in a more densely populated area, it's going to be a lot more individuals. But in this particular case, it was pretty easy. And I don't know what other towns have that ability, but I think most of them have that ability to draw a map and buffer. So even if you have to pick a a property on shore and then buffer from there 200 feet or 400 feet, whatever it is. I think that most towns probably are able to do that. Or applicants or anybody's able to do that.
I've not been able to do that, but I'll play around with it some more.
Okay.
Thanks, Lisa. That's the kind of suggestions that we're hoping to hear from the municipalities as to best practices to create this notification process. And as Jeff indicated, we're looking to partner with the towns to get some ideas to do that. Because notification is a responsibility of applicants in all of our any type of application submitted to the CRMC. So keep the ideas flowing, and I think we can learn from these examples, the one that you just gave, to help create sort of a uniform practice so that when applicants are ready with a formal application to do notice, we're all doing the same thing.
Are there other questions or observations? Okay. So we're going to conclude this meeting. Is that okay with everybody? All right. So thank you all. I'm going to pass it over to Jeff in a minute. We do have an educational series, as many of you may know. We had Michael Rice talk about aquaculture, the history of aquaculture, and then on October 26th, we have Dennis Nixon from Jamestown talking a bit about the private rights along Rhode Island shore. We'll send this along to the working group as well as through the listserv, but wanted to make you aware of this as well. So thank you for your input and your concerns and recommendations. Jeff, would you like to take us home?
I'd love to take us home. But I won't go there. Thank you all for making the time. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, we all are very busy, and this time of day is important to all of us. So that is very much appreciated that you took the time out of your day for this. I mentioned that we've heard some of these issues come up before. They're clearly on the table. I don't want to leave you with any impression other than we have a lot of work to do, and these are good suggestions that we need to make the process better. It's clear we need to make the process better. We thought we had a pretty good inclusive process, but we've come up against issues that we did not foresee. And these are issues that now we need to tackle. And so with your help, I'm certain that we'll get there. So I very much appreciate that too. And even some new issues like Chris, in your letter, Dan, you brought it up in Warwick, unloading of catch at non-traditional areas, if you will, is something that we're definitely going to have to look at. The notification one is huge though. So thank you for that input. Thank you for those ideas, and I'll just leave it there. So thank you all very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you very much for you and your crew hosting this. Very much appreciate it. So long. Good night.
Thank you.